Happy Friday, everyone.
We did it. We made it here.
We did it again. Alan Anderson from Shondell Group, who is going to turn the tables today and ask me some questions.
I thought it was only fitting to figure out some of the questions that maybe others have wondered but not had the opportunity to ask. And I kind of put you up to it. We had such a great Facebook Live a couple weeks ago. There was euphoria. There was high fives. People were
high fives. Somebody in an inappropriate shirt, Tyler, dressed for the Facebook Live occasion. So obviously there was high demand for us to come back.
With all the endorphins going, I thought, I'll bet this is the moment where I can get Dan to say, yes, I will answer the questions that you have, Alan.
Yeah.
You and Nth Degree are a handful of steps or miles down the path further than we are. And one of the questions that I've been curious now that we've been together as, I guess, brothers in arms, trying to start businesses in Seattle, trying to make a difference, trying to make an impact. One of the things that you told me back in the day, you have this big, hairy, audacious goal, this big vision for becoming the biggest and the best. And what I'm curious about is that makes sense. We've all hopefully have great, grand visions.
Yeah.
How do you keep that when things just, doors get slammed in your face, employees say you're the worst, your family is like, whatever. How do you keep that vision alive when things are not feeling so grand or so big picture, so to speak? Like it's just real life, day-to-day grind. How did you keep that going?
Yeah, good question. How do I keep that going? Up until probably about a year ago, we hadn't actually defined like our organizational purpose formally and values, which is great to have that done now because it's much more apparent, like how I keep it going, I guess. But so it's largely been more intuition driven up to this point. I think about if you imagine sort of me standing in the middle, or this like tug of war actually, and I'm on both ends of the spectrum. One end is like entrepreneurial mindset, which is like probably the core essence of my personality, which is kind of the way that I played basketball. Not that I was particularly good at it, but which was like hustle, want the ball, want to take the last shot sort of mentality. Yeah. And that's the way that I am as an entrepreneur. Like hustle, want to take that last shot. So that's like one end, entrepreneur's mindset of this like imaginary tug of war that I'm doing. Yeah. On the other end is sort of limiting beliefs that I have, and I shared. I think it was last week on my personal account about how for most of my life I was painfully shy, and a lot of folks are kind of surprised by that in terms of the way that I like show up in business now. Yeah. But more of my life I was painfully shy than not at this point. And so I have this like set of sort of limiting beliefs.
For instance, what's one of those?
Well, I'm a people pleaser, so part of that is like, am I good enough? Can I really make this happen? And that can sort of manifest into like avoidance or overcommitting to things to try to prove that I'm good enough. And so there's this like weird dynamic tension that exists between like the entrepreneurial mindset of like hustle, take the last shot, and then on the other end, sort of these limiting beliefs that are almost direct contrast to that. And so this like dynamic tension that's going on. Sometimes I pull too far towards the like limiting beliefs, and then there's like this pullback that happens. But the tension on the entrepreneurial side is so much stronger that I always, so long story so long, pull back to that. Like, that ultimately overrides, and over time, I'm more like in the middle than like allowing myself to go there.
So what are some of the tells? So I'm gonna, if I can, I'll make a parenthetical plug here for, I don't know if anybody's ever listened to the James Altucher podcast or read any of his books. Obviously a brilliant guy. One of the reasons he's so brilliant is he interrupts the hell out of his guests. Right?
He does.
But the beauty is it gets down past the surface. And so I would like to pretend, even though he's got way better hair than I do. How do you know? Like, how did you know when? So I love that spectrum. Makes a lot of sense. We need attention that we walk, because on one side there's complacency, and on the other side, maybe it's just comfort, or I guess actually complacency and comfort would be on one, and then on the other side is just grinding and pushing too much. And so always that tension. But for you, how did you start to know? What were some of the tells when you're like, oh, I'm too far on the people pleasing side, or like I need to get a little bit more counterbalance? How did you even know that?
Yeah, so I didn't necessarily know that until maybe the last couple of years. Up to that point was data points that were indicating that something was going on. It's like, I keep bringing on clients that aren't a good fit. And I know going into it that there's warning signs, but I'm doing it anyways. Like, I'm taking this client on. I'm overcommitting, and then things are blowing up, and I'm not able to get things done like I want. As a result, like, employees aren't happy, or the client's not happy, and I see it in the numbers. And so there are all these like data points of basically like what most people call failures, all these setbacks that are indicating that I'm doing something. There's something that I'm missing. And I have this principle, which is that if you if you keep running into the same mistake over and over again, and more than one person in your organization is doing that as well, then that's an indicator you need to have like a hard stop. Like, what is it that's causing it? So there was like this iterative process of why does this keep happening, and having these hard stops to go, okay, what is it that has caused this to occur? Well, we brought on a client that wasn't a good fit. And we overcommitted. It's like, okay, this is like the 6th time that's happened.
We've done that,
So then you like have enough data over time where you can sort of say, okay, well, peel back the layers. And what I came to was this idea of the limiting beliefs sort of on one end of the rope, and entrepreneur's mindset on the other, and that I need to sort of close the gap. Right. And that's actually how we came up with the whole idea of this like financial certainty roadmap, and this methodology that we take on with clients. Is I'm big into like having mental models and principles of how we make these decisions. So that sort of led to like, how can we build this out? Because I know I'm not the only one that's struggling with this. I see it with other clients in their numbers. And numbers are just the output of like operations and people.
That's right.
So what's going on there that we can create a model that they can sort of identify what I would call like the friction points that are causing them to make the wrong decisions, or causing them to be too delayed in making that decision.
I wonder, in this process, so, and again, obviously my question is, you have these big, hairy, audacious goals, and you keep with it. And now, I mean, it's I don't think necessarily you or I would have said, oh yeah, this person's going to be in this exact spot when we had our first lunch together in Pioneer Square, 6 years ago. Did you have anybody like? I guess. Well, actually, let me ask it this way. This is a better way to put it. Knowing what you know now, were you to start over, how would you have made some adjustments so that you could continue to win? Because clearly you're winning. You guys are doing awesome stuff. I keep, like, every chance I get, it's like, man, you got to talk to Nth Degree. They're changing the game. They're doing things differently. Which I have a fundamental belief that if you're not working to change the game, you're going to be dead in. I mean, all you're doing is breathing to death. And it just may take 5, 10, 15, 20 years as a business or as a person.
Right.
Knowing what you know now, though, like, what were some of the adjustments or tweaks that you would have made along the way? Or was it so seamless, you're like, I wouldn't have done anything? Like, it was fun kind of having this toggle back and forth of going, versus now you're starting to see, like, okay, I had this framework, entrepreneur's mindset, kind of this limiting beliefs. Do you make any adjustments on that mental processing to help the people that you're trying to mentor and lead do it better, or do it more efficiently, or do it more sustainably? Or are there any adjustments you're making in that process?
Yeah, in terms of things I would do differently, the first thing that comes to mind is is hire mentors sooner and keep them longer.
Interesting.
So,
and when you say hire, do you literally mean go like, hey, I will pay you to be my mentor?
To some extent, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've had periods of like sustained success with a coach or counselor, and then you have this like, okay, I conquered that, and then there's this gap, and in that gap, there's some like bounce back that happens, and so you have regressed a little bit, and then that pain becomes great enough, and then I find someone else to help with that, and then make progress. It's like, okay, I've conquered that, and so having hired mentors sooner in areas that I'm weakest at, and not necessarily have gaps. So that's probably the biggest thing that I would do differently.
That's really good.
That's what really leads to mind. The other, back to the basketball analogy, and this was something that a coach actually brought to my attention around this time last year, which was that he asked me what was my default sport growing up. Not necessarily like the sport that I played the most, but the one that I like self-identify the most with, which is basketball. And he asked like, what is your default style? And I explained like I would prefer to be like shooting guard, have the ball, etc. And he said, well, it's been my experience that someone's default sport is their default in business.
Interesting.
And the challenge that a lot of leaders run into is they're trying to be something other than that, trying to conform to these things that they're learning.
Wow.
And maybe holding back or pulling punches that they're not like naturally inclined to do, and that really resonated with me and caused me to like embrace like what is my natural style, what are the things that I really want to do, how can I spend more time doing that, which is sort of the idea of like just do what you're best at, and have other people do the things that you're never going to be great at. Just set in kind of a different way.
Yeah, it's tough though because it's great that you know that, and it's obviously the Strengths Finder, and there's lots of information around that. How do you do that when you don't necessarily have resources to attract somebody that's your opposite, that's great, and their strength is where you have a weakness, and I mean, maybe that's, and obviously I don't necessarily know.
How do you find the resources to do it?
Yeah, for sure, but like not just the resources, like how do you attract somebody who can come in and play to your weaknesses when you're a fledgling business or a fledgling, owner operator, or because how many people, and here's why I'm asking on this.
Yeah.
I feel like the majority, so clients rarely come to us and say, I am crushing it. I'm ready to crush it some more.
Right.
It's usually like, I have some
that's
pain.
definitely true. Something is going on that's catastrophic. Can you please help? Yeah.
And so sometimes when you start to say, okay, well, what are your strengths, what are your blind spots? Let's figure those things out. And then it's like, well, my limiting belief is I don't have the resources, whether it's financial or time, because it boils down to money or time, right? Time and money. So how would you say to attract somebody to cover your weaknesses when maybe you can't pay them as much as they think they should get paid, or maybe you need a partner level owner mindset?
Yeah.
How do you attract that when maybe it feels like you don't know how?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's probably, I break this into two pieces. One is thinking about things from a cost perspective versus an investment perspective. When you're making investments, what is your risk tolerance, and how do you approach that, which is different than a cost, which in general we're trying to leave. Right?
Okay.
So cost versus investment, that first is sort of the first mental model that you need when you're making a decision about this. The second piece is sequence, and now you ask this question, this would be the thing that I would, if I would go back, I would also make an adjustment, which is that there's sort of like seasons in your business, just like there's seasons in life. Yeah. Right? And there's a certain sequence at which things make sense. So just for example, I like shiny, sort of joke, like I like shiny objects. It's really easy for me to get distracted by like, this is the next big idea. I want to try this. But the problem is it in the right sequence for where I'm at in the business and the season that I'm in life. So I wanted to start a podcast, but it's not in the right sequence of where we're at in the business. So I could go out and find someone. I don't know where to start on that, right? It's like I get hung up in what's going to be the best audio equipment, how do I get it on iTunes, and all these sort of things. But in actuality, it's not in the right sequence for where we're at in our business. So I could go find an expert there, maybe have the resources to hire them, and I make this investment versus cost decision. But it turns out it's in the wrong sequence. So you need to figure that out first. And you could apply that same logic to any aspect of the business in terms of, when is it time for me to hire my first employee? When is it time to get an administrator? What's the season of the business?
That's a principle that overlays any. That's Absolutely. Right. That's great.
Yep. So I think back, like some investments that I made, and so there weren't costs, and I went through that analysis, and it was the right sort of risk profile, and have some principles around that in terms of making those investments. But it was the wrong season because we just had a baby. It's like I probably shouldn't be doing this and it's like tax season. So it's like I'm making this investment. I found like the perfect person to do it. They meet all my other kind of risk criteria, other principles that I have, but not thinking about the right sequence and the right season of our business to do it. And then you look back at it and you're like, oh, this was a failure. We didn't get the results that we wanted. Well, it wasn't the wrong person necessarily. It wasn't the wrong investment. It just was the timing that was on.
That's right. That makes a lot of sense. Isn't it amazing? Timing is so key.
This timing is everything.
I mean, that is a huge, huge element. Maybe I've got one last question for you, unless you're feeling like you're riffing and you've got hours and hours.
I could ramble forever. Also, if anybody has questions they want to drop.
This would be great. I would love to also hear your questions that we can tap into this guy's brain here. Help me understand, how did you start to grow? So what I heard you say is a year ago you realized we need to have kind of our core values of sorts. That lets everybody else at least know, like, what decision do I need to make when I can't talk to Dan, or I can't talk to Nolan, or I can't whatever, right? How about from a standpoint too of aligning and attracting great people? What were like? Do those values help you look at the ideal customer, the ideal client, the ideal coworker, colleague? What more do those values do other than just keep you anchored to heading to your true north, right? So it's kind of this tethering. What else are the values of having those actual core values that says this is who we are? This is what we believe. What have you experienced in that way?
A couple of things. Having those values and then asking the team to align. And the idea of align versus agree. And aligning, saying, it's not necessarily the way that I would do, but I could accept it as my own. So we ask everybody to align on these. And can't, let's get some feedback on that. Because then discussions you have with the team aren't immediately going to like, you suck, you don't care, you're not working hard enough. It goes to values, which is sort of independent of them. Hey, one of our values is respect, and when you told me that I was an asshole, that doesn't align with our values. Or you withheld from me, and we part of respect to us in our organization is being transparent. When you had a problem with me and you didn't say it, that's a respect issue. And so that helps sort of get to the critical path much faster than I think this person doesn't care, or sort of the judgments about somebody. In terms of like recruiting the right people and the right clients, we've talked about this a little bit, I think, around, and you mentioned it, so it's like a perfect tee up, is this idea of being anchored and how you can use anchoring to influence people. So a good example of anchoring for those of you that are out there is, why does gas prices seem so expensive? Like, well, when we got our car first, gas prices were, $1.
I paid 97 cents.
Yeah, there you go. So now it seems expensive because we're anchored. But Tiffany, who you guys can't see, is laughing right now because she was anchored to like $2.50. So she's like, $3. She just said $3. So she's like, you guys are old. $3 is the norm for gas prices. It's like, because that's what she was anchored to. So 97 cents seems ridiculously cheap. For us, $3 seems really expensive. So
Yeah.
that's the idea of like you're anchored, which is something you're set. So you can use, if you understand what someone is anchored to,
Yes.
then you can use that to influence them because of this whole like people are biased and they're looking for
Yeah.
gotcha moments. And if you're giving them data points that conflict with what they're anchored to, like they're just going to get more entrenched in sort of their
Yeah.
perspective, right?
That's right.
So when we do recruiting, I know people are anchored to this idea of like students that they need to work for one of the big four firms. That's everything is sort of catered to that, and you know, your career. If you don't do that, then you're not a top student, and all these sort of things. So we use anchoring to sort of influence. I know people come when we go to a recruiting event that they're going to say, "Okay, nth degree, got it. You're a small firm. That means that, you know, I'm not going to want to go there because small means that you're not big four, and big four is awesome." So we'll use that to our advantage, and I'll start by saying something that's really predictable, like, "Hey, I'm Dan. I started nth degree CPAs, and you know we have 13 people." Everything they're expecting me to say, and then I'll do a hard stop, and I'll ask them, "Hey, what do you guys think of that?" And there's usually like this like nervous adjusting, like, "What do you mean? What do I think of like this description?" It's like, "Yeah, what do you think?" And they're like, "Oh, it was okay." Like basically, it was exactly what I expected. That you're going to be a small, boring accounting firm. So then I will say, like, I will then directly approach the anchor and say, like, "That was pretty boring, right?" I'm like, "Huh? What?" Like, "Yeah, that's pretty boring. That's exactly what you expected." Like, "Yeah, that's right. That's exactly what I was expecting." And I'll make them close their eyes for like 30 seconds, take a couple of deep breaths, and then I'll tell them this very authentic version of what we do and how we're trying to be innovative.
Yeah.
And I'm basically trying to hard reset the like anchor on them. At which point the whole dialogue is different because they weren't expecting it, and I've like hit that head on.
Yeah.
And we have to do that in with recruiting to try to get access to top students, but we also have to do it with like client acquisition and this notion of like, you're just going to do my taxes and I'm going to talk to you once a year. How do I use that idea, that conception that you have of us? How do I use that, knowing it's the anchor that you have, to introduce something that's different?
That's right. That's amazing. I appreciate you sharing that story because you shared it once in passing, and that has stuck with me because in a lot of ways I didn't realize in those terms that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Is, you know, people think that we have these preconceived notions, and I just get further and further and further entrenched when I try to argue my way out of that, versus I've got to totally get past that, and to do that, there is something to be said. You got to do that. You got to follow the norm to get a conversation, because if you don't, people won't even give you the time of the day. But what you don't have to do is perpetuate that and try and make it a spitting contest or something like that.
I mean, you see it everywhere on social media where you have, you know, Republican and Democrat, and they're both anchored to those beliefs, and then they're both trying to influence the other person, and it's just making the other one more entrenched in their belief system because they're anchored, and you don't really have permission yet to like talk about something.
That's right.
You know, how can we have meaningful change? Like, well, we have to remove the anchor, reset things, so that we can have a conversation that's going to be different and unique.
That's right.
Until you do that, the conversation isn't going anywhere. That's right. So the more that
even
you argue with people,
even though people are nodding and smiling and saying they're not going to call you back, they're not going to say let's grab a drink, any of that. Because I think that's one key thing, at least in the Northwest. We're so politically correct. I'm like, man, Dan, you are a great guy. I look forward to, can I get your number so I can call you? And never see you again.
Exactly.
On purpose.
Yeah.
Let's do this. I like one last closing, because this will be quick. What's a book that you would recommend for us, or a resource to go and learn more about how to, just how to grow, how to be better? You know, maybe it's along the lines of your purpose, values, vision, mission. Maybe it's along the lines of like breaking, you know, getting to that anchor, unanchoring, re-anchoring. What's something you'd give us to go get better, smarter?
Sure. Two books that come to mind right away. One is from I can't think of the author's name, but he invented the Internet of Things, or he's attributed to that. And it's called How to Fly a Horse.
Okay.
And it's this whole idea around creativity, and it's debunking a lot of the notions that like you're just born as creative, which is not at all
That's
true.
Great. That's great.
So if you're trying to be innovative in your business, you got to read that book. The second one, and we just started today, which I couldn't be more excited about, an Nth Degree Book Club, and the whole office just shared their thoughts on the first 3 chapters.
You're kidding.
So no, I don't kid about book club. So we're all reading a book that I read recently that was recommended to me by some mentors, which is this one right here, Psycho-Cybernetics, and you should totally pick this up. I think it's only sold something like 10 million copies.
That's it.
So that's it. So it's out there a little bit, but it's this idea of self-image and how it's limiting what you're capable of doing, depending on how you sort of define it. So this idea of like just be positive doesn't necessarily work if your self-image doesn't allow you to do it. So we have to sort of rethink, reimagine your self-image. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, hey, thank you for letting me turn the tables today.
Yeah, that was awesome.
We'll have to do this again because I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thanks you guys.
I appreciate it. Thanks for joining.